And when they say the sky's the limit, orchestrating the constellations and knowing how they en route is almost the most organic way to have a skeleton key in an electric gulag. How well something is put on paper is completely different than what it is in real time. This can be orchestrated through holographic principle, specifically when it comes to star constellations, because they're constantly in a pulsating twinkle. The more of them you can articulate together to designate geometrics that are equivalent to your genes to whatever eating with a nutrient, if you can incorporate constellations that are which are an occurrence every day, even despite when there's floods, or if they were the agriculture or food you were eating was inside of a sewer because it got thrown down a swamp. Constellations are unable to get flooded, so they're going to remain in their geometrics. And I suppose the only way to dilute light would be through light pollution. This is something, an occurrence with lensing. Very much so, the further away we go from all of these lights, it condenses into one, but that can only make the geometric stronger. This is what I'm trying to implement with any constellation, having all of the makeup of the stars from behind it or in front of it lens into them by just making the vacuum that they're already in darker. That's when you would be utilizing the light pollution to enhance the geometrics of the shape of whatever constellations you're collecting. It's hard to understand what I'm referring to in a pendulum swing, but it's an abstract concept, just as though a diagonal drawn out between you and whatever constellation. We're adding the stars between them with Hubble's constant, because there's always an exchange of the atmosphere with collecting in different things, such as the sun. And all it could be is just like a giant land surveying game where all you're doing is just measuring the fine-tuned structure of the cosmological constant and then basing it off of the capacitance plate and the PS waves that are constantly in the current on the Earth's crust. Something that is caught if you think it's a loop and it's just repetitive because it's a constant, it can mean the difference between life and death. If you don't know that a poison has occurred in your body and it takes an entire life to kill you, you could argue that that poison was anything that your body ingested your entire life, or all of it together being one poison throughout your entire life at the moment so gradient where you would know the difference from each event, because it would all be the same thing. More condension, they would be equal to a small organism like sea monkeys. And sea monkeys are equivalent to having a giant pool full of like 30 goldfish if you combine the goldfish and compare the two bit by bit. Are operations incomplete if they're decohering and repeating? Just as lensing with light or shade, you can also have lensing with temperature, and this is when the gradient is more concentrated. Umbra and a penumbra are in relation to electromagnetic because it's invisible but then available on a radiation spectrum, just as the penumbra is invisible if it's circular, but during ellipse it protrudes. If there's a giant pendulum and it was swinging across everything that was uneven, but it was so even that you couldn't see it because it was that stable, then it would go across everything if it was infinitely large. How unstable, how camouflaged would it be, since the ground is never equal further than a few feet? Anywhere where it's white, it would divide from when it's dark, and then it would be able to pass that even quicker because it accelerates with the most even amounts, because its swing is allocated to a triangle that could be the center of the black hole of the galaxy, Milky Way, into the center of the Earth's core would be one swing. P and S waves in earthquakes are significant because one of them can't go through liquid, but they both go through solid. So they make a split in the basis, and where they cancel out because they're waves, and so they're splits into two shadow regions, because when traveling through an entire planet, half of it can only go through solid. Similarly, stars have ejections, and that's what makes them twinkle, ones that are inclusive of gamma rays. This is on a spectrum of half and half as well, where only if they're big enough they can achieve a gamma ray, and then all of the rest of them aren't. So that would be like a giant shadow region if there's two groupings, all based upon a coronal mass ejection. And it's so interesting because there's another entire group of stars that were product of quasars, and quasars automatically apply to gamma ray radiation because they're so bright that their entire thing is that whole category. Within all the stars inside the entire universe, it's like you have a giant shadow zone for half of them because they're too small, but the twinkles of some can achieve it through a coronal mass ejection. It's just the more that you can collect definite structures such as an umbra and a penumbra, and if they're on cosmological scales, they're that much more accurate. So when it comes to gamma ray burst or obtaining an umbra from a penumbra, you're going to be able to deduct more accurate values for larger regions. The more that you can collect definite structures such as an umbra and a penumbra, and if they're on cosmological scales, they're that much more accurate. So when it comes to gamma ray burst or obtaining an umbra from a penumbra, you're going to be able to deduct more accurate values for larger regions. Especially because an entire field would give an entire set of genes for each of the plants being utilized. So within each constellation, they're radiating in a vacuum. This is similar to agriculture, where each field has a set of nutritions and it varies within the photosynthesis. But the more that you can render the nutrients within the rooting system, it's no different than the interior of a star undergoing fusion. So the equation with the radiation is equivalent to the nutrients of an agricultural field. And this is what is called the cream of the crop when it comes to an extract of an entire yield. It's a quantity in a solution of the entire equation, and it's just articulately constructed in constellations already, so why not utilize them? So a pair of genes can have a quality where the energy holding them together, mainly the telomeres at either end, is equivalent to how a star close it is to not being able to undergo fusion any longer, because when it can't, it has two options: to split or to burn out. If it splits, then it'll go supernova and become a black hole. That's equivalent to a gene being entirely separated when the telomeres are gone. If it was burnt with ashes of a whole bunch of petals. And so delete button can look like the back of a bucket if it's a lamp